journey's over till another year.
Supermassive Games, a developer that is mostly known for platformers, gimmicky games and as of late interactive horror movie experiences. Starting with Until Dawn, which was a big surprise hit for the PS4 and has started the adventure into this kind of games, which recently also got a remake. I'm not sure if that was necessary, to be honest. When I played that game I thought it still looked quite good, even though there's of course the uncanny valley effect on the characters. And I doubt that they will completely fix that with the remake, if at all. But when I played it back in the day I quite enjoyed it. But after Until Dawn they continued with some spin-offs first. The pretty good Rush of Blood, which is a railgun shooter though, in which you are sitting in a roller coaster ride, riding through a haunted house like hellish environment. I liked it but actually played it before Until Dawn, so it left me a bit confused at times, but I still had fun. There was also The Inpatient, which sounded great, a VR prequel in which you are taking control of a patient in an asylum, while the dark forces of Until Dawn are coming closer. Unfortunately it had huge pacing issues and unclear consequences for your decisions, which is frustrating. They also made Hidden Agenda, which, well, so far it's probably the worst of the bunch. A lackluster serial killer thriller with technical issues, some bad acting, directing, and the thing that probably killed the whole game is the necessary to use playlink. Despite these setbacks, they continued with their interactive movies and created the Dark Pictures Anthology, a spiritual successor to Until Dawn, which for some reason never got a proper sequel, despite being a hit. With 4 episodes and a spin-off, each having a standalone story but some references to each other, this seems quite promising. Recently there was a bundle with these games and I looked forward to play through those games, as I liked Until Dawn and surprisingly also liked the similarly styled Detroit Become Human, an interactive movie, so recently interactive movies really piqued my interest again. And as I have now a PS5 I also started with a bit of Switchback VR. But after the first 2 missions I decided I didn't want to make the same mistake as with Rush of Blood and played through Man of Medan first. Yes, I played through the whole season afterwards, and I want to talk about it now. Like Until Dawn, Hidden Agenda, Rush of Blood and The Inpatient, Man of Medan was co-written by Larry Fessenden, a relatively famous indie producer, director and writer of mainly small horror productions. As an actor he has played parts for Martin Scorsese among others, but is mostly seen in horror movies. The gameplay is similar to Until Dawn. You have quick-time events, some short stretches of exploration in which you can look for collectibles and info, to learn about the backgrounds and find pictures that will give you premonitions. You have also moments in which you have to stay still by pressing a button every time you see a heartbeat symbol coming up. There are also some quick combat moments in which you have to aim and hit enemies at the right spot in a short window of time. You of course also make decisions what the characters do or say, changing the story of the game. You can also see if you unlock certain traits over the course of the game and how the relations between the characters are changing. That's basically how you play all these games. Another common theme is the curator. After playing the games for a while you see a curator voiced by Pip Torrens, but for some reason not visually portrayed by him. Each game has a cold open, a prologue often set in the past and showing what we will be confronted with, and then the curator walking in with a great song playing, and then telling us that we have to help him finish the story he has today. He appears after every act and comments on our progress and decisions. Man of Medan follows the story of a couple of tourists and their captain in French Polynesia. They go diving and find a shot down plane, and suddenly are abducted by some fishermen/pirates. Eventually the fishermen are bringing the tourists to an abandoned American warship. On board they are confronted with some scary zombie demon-like creatures. I will leave it mostly at that, as with these games it's mostly about the story and I don't want to spoil it. But I can say this one was a bit of a disappointment. It's not that well written, they foreshadowed way too hard what's going on, having me early on figuring out what the reason for the zombies is. and when it is eventually revealed what exactly is going on, it comes kind of unprompted and feels really dumb. But dumb is basically the leitmotif here. I think on paper it was probably okay, but in execution it doesn't make much sense. We have scenes of kidnappers talking about one of them not being found while one of the pirates is very nearby, and there were a couple of moments like this. Also dialogues that just kind of repeat even though we already have the information or the people should kind of acknowledge it already. Technically there are also issues. There were rough transitions at times, weird animation issues, and just faults in the presentation that you can see, like someone cutting ropes that look more than unconvincing. And while having the legend of the Orang Medan is very interesting, the actual story is pretty weak. The characters are stupid and the dialogue is annoying, including sentences like #nope nope nope. I don't know what happened. I guess the budget and time they had was lower than for Until Dawn, and they just couldn't deliver what they wanted with this one. And I hope the others are better. It just could have been better, let's leave it there. And Man of Medan gets a disappointing 5 out of 10. Supermassive Games followed this weak first outing up with Little Hope, which is fitting as I had little hope in this game. The reason is simple. Well, I have unfortunately to admit that I just don't like Will Poulter most of the time. I know it's a bit odd, but that's just the way it is, I guess. It's probably that I have only watched some shitty comedies with him and Midsummer, in which he arguably played the worst character. There's also the fact that he is just kind of this very punchable face. But to my surprise, I have to admit it was pretty good and Will wasn't too bad, actually. The biggest fault I can give his character in the game is that he has a pretty odd character model in the prologue, but that's basically it. This part is overall just a big improvement on Man of Medan. It's technically better, the dialogue and characters are better written, the story just works better overall, even though it's a bit too much walking around the road through a fog. But what is it about? In the prologue we see the character portrayed by Will and his family in the 70s. They seem to be adopted or a patchwork family, I guess, and the youngest sister is regularly mocked by her siblings, except for Will and his older sister. But soon tragedy strikes, and during a house fire the whole family dies in increasingly bizarre circumstances. But next up we see a bus crashing due to the foggy road, and some fighting between the bus passengers. Moments later, Will wakes up. He realizes that the people he encounters look like his family members, but they tell him they are all part of a college class. The game then follows the group in their search for help, other passengers and the bus driver. But the only things they find are an old black man and an abandoned town. But soon after they are haunted by ghosts from the olden days of the witch hunts, which also resemble them, and eventually demons that chase after them. Sounds odd, convoluted and confusing? That's right, but it's actually worth it. The story is foreshadowing something early on, and I thought it would end up the same way as Man of Medan. But the characters themselves have the same assumption I had early on as well, and the twist ends up being something very different. But maybe I was so focused on what I thought the twist would be, that I simply didn't get anything else, that I didn't think of anything else. Gameplay wise we have the same fare as the other Supermassive games, so nothing new here. The dialogue and choices are well done here though. We don't have any #nopes or other cringe dialogue. And while Man of Medan lets your main cast survive if you just succeed in all the QTEs, here your choices can also affect the survival of your cast. Something that surprised and honestly a little bit angered me when I realized that I didn't save one of the characters, but I actually went back and played some chapters again to save everyone, just like I did in Man of Medan in the first playthrough. This was a pretty cool, fun little mystery horror story and I liked it quite a bit. It's not great or fantastic, but a really cool little game. As I said, they just walk a bit too long along the damn road and they hold on to the mystery also for a little bit too long. Some of the decisions and twists towards the end were also a bit sudden, but not as bad as Man of Medan. This was closer to Until Dawn. It didn't quite get there, but was pretty close. and I will give Little Hope a 7 out of 10. Next up we have the part of the series which seems to be considered to be the best of the series so far, House of Ashes, starring Ashley Tisdale, one of the stars of High School Musical, which I have never seen, but I saw her as a side character in a couple of sitcoms and I thought she was fine for that, actually not that bad. But seeing her in a horror story, especially one that is set during the Iraq War, with her being a CIA operative, well, that's asking a bit much. But I'm an open-minded man and I can deal with people cast against character. I actually like this a lot of times. It turned out that I would have problems with this one though, but for reasons I didn't expect. More about it later. House of Ashes is a pretty original take and offers a rarely used setting. There are only very few horror stories set during war, and even fewer during the Iraq War, but there are stories with this setting, none of which I know were good though. But the Dark Pictures are always good for a surprise, and with House of Ashes these surprises already start with the prologue. Set in ancient times, we follow a captain in the Akkadian army. They sacrifice people to the gods and hope that the curse will be lifted. Even the captain's daughter isn't spared. But the enemy is at the gates and soon storms the fortress. But as that isn't enough, there's also the curse and a monster is killing the people of Arcadia and probably also the attackers. The captain works together with an enemy and tries to fight back, but the monster is seemingly just too strong. Next up we flash forward to 2003. We see Rachel making out with a marine when she is getting informed that her husband is coming with them on a mission. They are on bad terms after they had an accident which left her husband, Eric, seriously injured. He actually has lost part of his leg. The love triangle and history Rachel and Eric share will be adding to the soon very complex and outright bad situation. On their mission they find a couple of shepherds who turn out to be drug traffickers. But soon things get worse because the Iraqi army is attacking the Americans, and on both sides people die. Even worse, suddenly the ground breaks open and they soon find themselves trapped underground. Americans and Iraqis fight each other underground now, but quickly they find an even bigger threat. Monsters soon attack and the enemies have to work together if they want to live. This worked mostly much better than I would have expected. Usually these war horror movies are pretty cheesy, but there were some fun and well-made horror games with that setting. While rough, Necrovision was a lot of fun at times, and Ad Infinitum, which we also reviewed already on this channel, was a nice surprise. And while some dialogue and situations are cheesy or badly written, it's an overall tense and well-written story. We also don't play just as Americans, but also as Salim, an Iraqi soldier. He has the voice of Nick Tarabi from the Modern Warfare remake and the Spartacus series, but a different character model. And there are some interesting situations that you encounter. Salim is probably the most level-headed and sympathetic character in the game, and well handled. He can also develop a real bromance with some of the Americans, which leads to nice character developments. Especially with the most intolerant hillbilly redneck character on the American side. The story is basically the definition of going from bad to worse, and eventually there is a pretty bizarre twist, which left me thinking of Life Force of all things. Yeah, I didn't exactly love the last parts of the game regarding to revelations and setting. I did like the tense moments though, and especially in the last couple of minutes there's a really cool idea, which I liked a lot. And if I will ever write a story like this, I will probably just steal this idea. The love triangle and the past between Rachel, the Marine, Nick and her husband Eric was pretty badly handled though, in my opinion. I thought it was just unnecessary and not well established. Once you learn what exactly happened between Eric and Rachel, she also just seems like a heartless bitch, to be honest. Of course it could be just the options I took, but the dialogue that was delivered was still what it is and the setup too. So yeah, I don't think any way this will be handled would be to my liking. Also the game often throws you into a situation to explore your surroundings, but then cuts you off with a cutscene without any warnings, and you sometimes get thrown back into the scene to keep exploring, but it's just annoying. Same goes for the close camera, which makes it hard to properly see when you walk through the narrow corridors, and there are quite a few as you're underground in caves for most of the time. But I did like the story overall, as I said. It's quite tense at times, there is a lot of action and monster fighting, and many of the decisions force you to make a rational choice instead of an empathetic one, which makes you understand why characters in horror movies are often making stupid decisions. There are also QTEs which can lead to a character's demise, which you can see in the cutscenes. But you are not sure if you should stop and maybe create an even bigger problem. This makes you think of what you are doing and the consequences it could have. It's overall good but not great, but it is very solid. I liked Little Hope a bit more, but I will give House of Ashes also a 7 out of 10.
Welcome to Camp Slayer. You're early.
I can already say right off the gate, this last one was unfortunately the worst part of Season 1, which is a shame as there are good ideas. The prologue is about a couple that is entering the Hotel of Horrors of H.H. Holmes and find their untimely demise. Then we fast forward to present day. Charlie, the head of the company for video productions, is focusing on a documentary about creepy places and general dark subject matters. The struggling production company seems to have hit the jackpot when they are invited to the Hotel of Horrors by Dumet, the current owner of the hotel. Of course things turn deadly though, and the crew is not just seeing the crime scene of century-old murders, but enter the place of a crime in progress, as a serial killer is stalking the crew and intends to kill them and turn them into animatronics and mannequins. The hotel is also still a maze and full of traps and dead ends. Sounds pretty interesting, right? Could have been, but it's not. Technically the game runs pretty bad. It's the worst one of the bunch. The FPS drop more and more the more you play it. The screen tearing is the worst one I saw in any game, and I'm working in QA. It got so bad that I eventually turned down the resolution and some of the settings to see if it runs better, and with full HD it ran much smoother and without the screen tearing. But even a smoother performance doesn't make the terrible dialogue and boring story any better. There is not really a mystery, I would say. The game tries to tell one, but it just doesn't work at all. There is a serial killer stalking the crew, but it's not intimidating at all. They pretend to have another Jason or Michael here, but it's not even a ghost face or leprechaun. This feels like one of the killers of a bad remake or slasher movie that was made and immediately forgotten. The characters and dialogue is also terrible. There is this lesbian couple that is kind of flirty, but the dialogue is just so incredibly bad that it is off-putting, especially when they meet for the first time. They try to be quirky and funny, I guess, but it's just cringeworthy. It was probably the only time in any of these games that I thought about killing those characters off on purpose. I mean, really, in all these games I always try to save all the characters, but after hearing that dialogue I was thinking of killing them off, just to end this terrible dialogue. Which is a shame, as they on their own are okay characters, but every time they talk with each other it's just odd. There are also bugs, one especially annoying one right off the bat, as the curator sometimes changes his dialogue depending on possible save games he has read. A really cool idea. For example, he is at the end of each episode saying that we might meet again and references one of the other games that you haven't played yet. In this one he also recognized me and said last time everyone died and asked me if I was even trying.
Are you for real?
I mean, for real, man, I didn't save all those annoying 20-somethings to be humiliated by ripped torrents. The setting, the pace of the story, the decisions, everything is just so lackluster and kind of bad. I only liked Charlie from all the characters. The lesbians were kind of annoying when they were together, even though at least they had their moments. And the other straight couple is just so bland, I almost forgot everything about them. They have some non-conflict, which is easily resolved if they would talk about it, which they eventually do, but it's just... The story involving the serial killer was as weak and bland as potato salad, I would say. They tried to do something with him, but it ends up being absolutely nothing. Not just disappointing, but bad, unfortunately, and it's a shame as they seem to build something up here. But it fails pretty hard and is the weakest episode of Season 1, and the devil in me gets a below average 4 out of 10. But I still hope that Supermassive Games continues with the Dark Pictures Anthology, as I really do like the idea, and 2 of the games were also pretty well done. And I'm not finished with this season yet, I would say, as there is a spin-off with Switchback VR, which I also checked out. So as I'm writing this, I have finished Switchback VR, and what can I say? It's a lot of fun. Switchback VR is the spiritual successor to Rush of Blood and basically a best-of kind of clip show in video game form, I would say. Switchback VR plays basically exactly like Rush of Blood, but you're on a roller coaster / haunted house attraction armed with 2 firearms. You can shoot not only enemies but also boxes with different guns. Arrows that will open another path for you and part of the environment which can be influenced. There are also once again some marked objects that can be shot for bonus points. Like Rush of Blood, this is light on story, especially when compared to the regular Supermassive game. You are simply someone in a subway who is stuck in a wreck when the subway is involved in a horrific accident, while fighting your way through the hellish visions which resemble the Dark Pictures Anthology games of the first season. You don't only fight for your life, but also that of the other passengers. In some special events, the antagonist of the game is Belial, who was a crazy woman on the subway, and the demon in these visions that mocks you from time to time. We also see the curator from time to time, but in this game he is just a silent observer. The gameplay is simple. You sit in a roller coaster cart and monsters appear, which you have to shoot. Sometimes there are also simple puzzles or events, which have to be completed, and you can use several weapons to progress. You always have your standard pistols, which have unlimited ammo, but there are also heavy pistols, shotguns, MPs, rocket launchers, and some gadgets that can be used. All of these have limited ammo, which you can see in form of skulls on your wrist. Per game of the Dark Pictures Anthology, there are 2 levels in which you can save passengers and fight a boss. Once 2 levels have been completed, you can see an overview which tells you which way you went and how you completed these events. When you get damaged too much, you die. That's it, but you restart at the last checkpoint. It doesn't just progress like the Dark Pictures games, of course. It's of course not complex, but it's fun. It looks pretty and is full of creepy moments and jump scares, just like haunted houses should be. Mission accomplished, I would say. Switchback VR is a solid game and a lot of fun, but unfortunately it's pretty quickly done, which would be fine, but there's also not much to unlock. Having some extras to unlock or some more replay value, trying different routes or maybe completing events differently is not that much. Compared to the other Dark Picture games, which offer unlockable bonus features like interviews or behind the scenes documentaries or documentaries about the topic at hand, are interesting, but are not part of this game. Unlocking other standard weapons or upgrading weapons or your character at least would have been nice. But it's still a good game, and I'm glad this was the first game I completed on PSVR 2, and it's just a nice idea for a spin-off. I don't know how much the production costs were, but I would assume the reuse of assets made it cheaper. But it doesn't feel cheap, which is also a plus. While the first season was a bit mixed, this was surprisingly solid, and I hope the second season gets another spin-off, and I will give Switchback VR a 7 out of 10. But as I am already on a Supermassive Games roll, I think I can give you a bonus review. Another game from this interesting developer, and something that is supposed to be a spiritual successor to Until Dawn, probably even closer than the Dark Pictures Anthology games. The Quarry. The Quarry already started like a nice change of pace. We are immediately in the car with a couple talking. The graphics are very nice, and soon we are introduced to the QTEs. And learn that these are not that clearly displayed like they were in the Dark Pictures. Truth be told, I at first thought they had the PlayStation layout for controllers, despite me using the Xbox controller, as it looked like a circle was displayed, but instead it's supposed to be a stick that will show you where you have to point the stick a moment after the prompt appears. But you learn quickly how to use it. It is annoying for the first couple of times though, until you figure it out. The production value seems much higher than the Dark Picture series, but it's not quite as polished as Until Dawn, but it's at least close, I would say. Definitely looks and runs much better than The Devil in Me. We also have a cast of recognizable actors, not just one but almost the whole cast. We have Justice Smith, Brenda Song, Ethan Suplee, for some reason, just playing a hulking hillbilly, Lance Henriksen, for some reason playing an old hillbilly, Lin Shaye obviously playing the matriarch hillbilly, and David Arquette, who has proven that he is fond of horror and even directed a horror movie, Ariel Winter, a couple of other known faces with not quite so known names, and Ted fucking Raimi in a much bigger role than I had ever expected. The game does have probably less interactability than the other Supermassive games, and is focusing more on presentation and story, and it seems quite nice at first. Maybe it could be on the level of Until Dawn, but in a summer camp instead of a winter resort. In the prologue we see the couple have an accident and being intimidated by the creepy sheriff Ted Raimi, who tells them to go to the next motel, but instead they want to go to the summer camp one day early and stay the night there, which will have terrible consequences, and is honestly a pretty odd thing to do. After that we go to the end of the summer. Camp is over and there are several couples or possible couples and tensions. This causes Jacob to do something very stupid and sabotage the car in which they wanted to leave. Camp head Chris Hackett, played by David Arquette, is getting some help and tells the kids to stay inside until morning. So they start partying, of course, meet some hillbilly hunters, and quickly a monster is attacking them over and over again. There is a mystery, and the hillbillies and the monster have some history together, which we will learn over the course of the game. Depending on how we decide and if we act correctly in certain QTEs and interactive moments, we can learn about the dark history of Hackett's quarry, find enough evidence to prove what happened, and have all people survive, maybe even Jacob.
Oh shit! Quiet! Shut the door! Oh,
That fucking idiot. The quarry does a lot of things right, but I can already say at this point it doesn't quite live up to the heights of Until Dawn. The reason is simple. The story, while having potential, suffers from bad dialogue at times and pacing issues. It's very start and stop, has too many characters that are separated and reunited several times and have bring each other up to speed of what happens over and over again, while the player and viewer already knows what happened, or have it figured out because the story isn't that complex or surprising. It feels like we have too many scenes and not enough scenes at the same time. There is an interesting backstory, but it's presented in a very rushed manner, and sometimes a bit fractured or incomplete. It also bothered me that we have bad jokes over and over in moments when we have already danger nearby, and the characters have experienced mortal threats. At this point the behavior isn't just quirky, it's outright stupid, leaving me scratching my head. The end is also sudden, and I'm not sure how important the collecting of evidence was in the end. I think I was overall quite thorough in this game, but I surely missed some clues and evidence. But I did not get arrested, I think, so I'm not sure if that had any effect. Maybe in the very annoying, not skippable podcast we hear over the credits, something changes depending on how much evidence you found. But if that's the case, that's just weak. Overall, the story was okay, but not great, and it has some issues. As a game it will probably not be that obvious at times, but the characters are very stupid most of the time, and often just annoying. Not as bad as The Devil in Me, but pretty bad at times. There's even a Hooky McHook face joke, which made me cringe so hard it physically hurt. There are also just too many playable or important characters, I would say. Getting rid of one or two would have been fine, and it would have given more room for more interesting story parts for the remaining characters. The quarry is not bad, it's also not disappointing, but it could have been more. It does feel like a spiritual successor of Until Dawn. Even the monsters look kind of similar, but it's not quite as good. Getting Larry Fessenden back as a writer or one of the writers of the better Dark Pictures games might have improved the game and the story. But as is, it's still fine. The at times weak story and dialogue hurt the game though, just as Jacob might get hurt. But it's an acceptable, actually quite solid interactive movie overall, and I will give The Quarry a 7 out of 10. And if you excuse me, I will now go back and save Jacob, as he was the only playable character who died in my playthrough. That fucking idiot.
Ah!